All right, welcome everybody. Good afternoon, and welcome to the Future of Banking panel. This is intended to be a fireside chat with no fireside, so just we'll pretend it's right there. We got a really great panel assembled today for our discussion, and really looking forward to it. I'll kick off with a few introductions. My name is Peter Baywin. I am the Global Vice President of Commercial Life Sciences at Cooper Surgical. We represent healthy women and families with a diverse portfolio of medical device and fertility products, but also newborn stem cells. And we represent the private side with banks in Australia, Canada, and the United States. And with us, I'll introduce the panel in just a moment, but really just for a moment, talking about what this panel is all about today. So cord blood banks, both public and private, are facing numerous challenges and opportunities as times change. And whether it's for hematopoietic therapy transplants or cell therapies, we really have to think about, rather than being reactive, how can we be proactive in terms of how we want the next 5-10 years to look. So we've assembled this panel to answer this question, and we've got some great thought leaders across the nation, across the globe, representing public, private, and research. The panel is going to be broken up really into 3 core topics, looking at the current challenges in the industry, ways we can change today, and then new models for growth and thinking through the future. And we have speakers dedicated each topic. I'd love for this to be true to form of a fireside chat, so we'll have open Q&A after each of the 3 different sections. So I'd love to have participation and be interactive. So please save your questions, and I'll call on you at the end of each section. So I'll introduce the panel. Let's meet the team here. So first up is Marcy Finney, who's right there. With over 20 years' experience, Marcy has played a pivotal role in educating medical personnel, supporting families, and driving growth of the cord blood applications. She's the executive director of the Cleveland Cord Blood Center and has led the organization through significant milestones, securing vital funding, establishing invaluable partnerships, and fosters the ever-growing expansion of cord blood usage. Ana Valverde, right here to my right. She is the administrative director of the Marcus Center for Cellular Cures at Duke University, which encompasses the Carolina Cord Blood Bank. She has 25 years of experience in strategic planning, finance, and management research operations, and the last 13 years with the Carolina Cord Blood Bank. Kate Gerard, to her right, has entered the cord blood industry directly from a clinical background in obstetrics. She was a labor and delivery nurse and has a master's. Pardon my switch over here on notes. She has worked with Viacord in numerous roles over the last 20 years, supporting clinical aspects of collection, banking, and research, as well as clinical use of banked family cord units. Currently, she's the director of clinical market development from Viacord from Revity. Calvin Cole, to her right, is a managing partner and founder of CTH Biosourcing and has over 25 years of professional experience in healthcare management with extensive business background in product marketing, strategic planning, new product planning, and business development across government relations, both in the U.S. and abroad. He has been a consultant to industry manufacturers and nonprofits in different healthcare environments. He's an advocate and promoter for both public and private cord blood banking based on his years' experience in accelerating the use of cord blood and perinatal tissues to benefit patients in advancing medicine. And then last is Tomas Baran. He's a MD and MBA, and he's the executive vice president for FamiCord and chief commercial officer for Vita 34, which formed the largest cord blood bank network in Europe. Depending on the country, his company offers family banking, hybrid banking, and a public banking, and on top of that, manufactures cell and gene therapy products. So I think we've got the right crew here to discuss this topic. So I will kick things off, and we'll talk about the challenges within the industry today, and primarily the barriers to traditional use. So for the first topic, I'd call on Marcy and Tomas. The question prompt for today is, as new therapies continue to evolve, be it allogeneic use, multiple units, and beyond, what are some of the newer barriers in the past 3 years and those to come that may limit the traditional use of stem cells derived from cord blood?
Hi, so I think I'd like to talk a little bit about consent, right? We heard a little bit about this morning that I think we could just do a better job of that because patients are becoming more knowledgeable and the conversation's becoming more complex when we talk to patients. One little anecdote, so my 75-year-old mother gets monthly shots of VEGF in her eyes for macular degeneration. So I went with her to try to enroll in a trial for genetic modified cells so that she could get shots every quarter. And they managed in about a 4.5-minute video to explain gene therapy to my 75-year-old mother and what the risks and the benefits were in a cartoon-like video. I went because I was afraid she wasn't going to understand what was going to happen to her. But they did an amazing job with this video. So I'm thinking that maybe there's some opportunity for us. You know, cord blood donation is not as complex as getting gene therapy shots in your eye. That maybe we could do a little bit better job of having some other new technologies that would be able to consent donors, or at least give them a landscape in a 4-minute cartoon video that would help us to do a better job of consenting. So I think that's one thing I would think about.
That's great. Thank you. Tomas?
Well, I think that we have plenty of old barriers, not only new barriers. And, cord blood banking is not just for banking. Cord blood banking is to be able to release that sample to the therapy. And when I was comparing how many units are really released from the family banks, because this is what is closest for my activity, I see a big difference comparing largest US banks, largest Korean banks, and the largest EU bank. So in Korea, Medipost published very nice data a couple of years ago when they showed that they released one sample per 500 stored, 400, 500. US banks, more or less one per 1,000, yes? In Europe, we have one per 10,000. So in my company at Famicord, we are releasing more or less one. We are better than average. We are releasing one sample per 4,000, 5,000 stored. So there are some reasons for that, and I think that there is a lack of trust from the transplant centers to the banks, especially for family banks, which some of them are quite well regulated, accredited, and so on, and they are prepared to deliver to the units, to the transplant centers, good quality unit. But sometimes the transplant centers simply do not accept that, and we had a couple of such situations which were hard for us to understand, that the good quality material was not used. The other option was chosen, and it's of course our role as a bank is to deliver that material, but we would be super happy when that material really works, really saves lives. So I think that there is a trust, education needed, and I think also we had a very nice session yesterday about the alternative donor sources, and we see that simply sometimes there are some trends or fashions among transplant centers, and they prefer to use the other material than cord blood. But we can change it.
Great, thank you. So we'll move on to our second question, which is around inventory management, and we'll have Calvin and Marcy jump in on this one. And some of us were just in a luncheon next door talking about this very topic, and specifically how have current inventories have changed, and how should they potentially change to bend the curve of more releases for use. We all know the more releases that happen can propel the industry forward. So who'd like to go first?
Calvin said I should go first.
Okay.
All right.
Marcy.
Well, I think it's changed over time too, right? So our bank was established someplace in the middle, right? So we were born out of the assumption that distributions were going to be a function of how many we had in inventory, right? So we spent probably the first 8 to 10 years growing that inventory. We thought that when we got to 10,000 units in our bank, we had hoped for 100 distributions for traditional use. And if you looked at the curve when we established our bank, that wasn't, it was 5 or 10% or 5% of the overall use. But unfortunately, what happened for us is the market went down at the same time. So I think we had 1 year in the 15 years where we did distribute over 100, right? But Then what we realized was that it was obviously not a function of how many units you had in your inventory. So we had to be more thoughtful about what we were banking to conserve our resources, right? Because that's the majority of our expenses are getting units into the bank. So we looked to try to make sure that we were banking the units that were the most likely to be used. And we talk a lot about TNC and about CD34, but for public cord blood banks, there's also that other axis, which is we want to have a cord blood unit for everyone. So one of the things we did was expand our collections across the country of collection sites in Cleveland, collection sites in Atlanta, Georgia, collection sites in California in the East Bay, to try to make sure that we have units that would serve a lot more people. But it still hasn't really extrapolated into that many more distributions, but I feel like we're getting better matches for patients. I feel like we're utilizing our resources well to make sure that we're banking the right units.
Calvin?
Well, so the industry has evolved and continued. I can remember the first cord blood meeting I went to in, I think it was '06 at the LAX airport, right? We've come a long way, but we're all still here, and that the industry has continued to fight and evolve into what it is. I think all the public cord blood banks would, if they could reset and start over, they would only make the biggest of units. Obviously, can't go backwards, but we can go forward. And so the question is, how can we build this, super strength inventory, new added inventory that would maybe help release us, make the transplant centers come back to this as a really good choice because the units are big and they're available immediately. But to do that, the collections, as Marcy was saying, is extremely expensive when you're operating at different hospitals with different staff, with CGMP paperwork, all the elements that go into it. You got the hospitals, the physicians, the transportation of getting the units back to the lab. It's very expensive. So how do we figure out how to work together to create, there's an enormous growth in sports medicine, advanced wound care, and surgical that are using these same birthing products. So the idea of how do you become that, I like to say like waste management of the OR, but distributing the product that has always been medical waste to the different industries that can help bring down the cost of that public banking to a level to where you can put a bigger inventory back in. As you, like every time you release one, you put 10 in, but they're all big. So I think that's one of the things we need to continue to look at, and I know the leaders in that field are definitely always trying to manage that, but we just have to continue to evolve and find those ways to try to bring down the cost and expand the access.
And I think the inventory is really challenging when you don't have distributions, right? I use the analogy, if I was making water bottles and I had 11,000 in my warehouse and I'm distributing under 100, you have to make different choices about what your manufacturing looks like. We can't continue to just keep making and making and making and not have a really thoughtful way to do that.
And I think that's an element really for the CBA to continue to talk about, is thinking of how do we work together to make some definitions of what we want that inventory to look like in the future, and how can we all collectively help us get there.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, because I do think now is the right opportunity. It used to be that at least the NCBI banks had a disincentive to sort of be more strategic about what you were adding to your inventory, because we were all very reliant on the sort of funding that was coming from HRSA. But now with all these new sort of potential uses of these surplus materials, it is the right moment to sort of rethink about what we're adding to our inventory, because now all of a sudden you do have alternative uses for the smaller units. So it is the right time to reconsider.
So speaking of inventory, one of the elements relating to inventory is certainly consent, and the forms that go from a patient perspective. And so we have talked about this a little bit in the past as well. Consent forms, obviously super critical, but the forms themselves can create a myriad of limitations on the ultimate collection and release of that actual sample. So thinking from an industry perspective, how might we influence really those consents to help propel the right documentation and propel ultimately releases so we don't have inventory to continue to stack up. So from that perspective, love to hear from Anna and Kate.
Yeah, so I'm really glad you brought up, Marcy, the example of the little video, because I think that's an amazing idea. We are not there. Our consent is still, I don't know, 15 pages long. Even though we are a licensed bank, we've continued to use an IRB-approved consent form, which again makes the whole consenting process very, very long and involved. And because we actually have 3 different IRBs, even our consent is not universal for all of our sites. But we've taken some steps to try to streamline that process, and we do make sure that at least the commercial use opt-out language is the same across all of our sites. But there's certain room for improvement in how we are consenting. We are at least now doing e-consents, so electronic consents, which also actually play a role in in the instances where we do want to reconsent the donor for whatever reason. It used to be that we had a very low, or I would say 50% success rate in reaching or recontacting a donor, and even when we did contact them, to make sure that they were actually accepting our mailing and getting them to mail back, with a signature. That was a really involved process. So now that we are moving to e-consents, that should be a more straightforward process. But clearly, I think there are other tools that we could be using to facilitate that process that we're not using right now.
Yeah, I agree. So we talked a little bit about this before, and we were trying to think of where there could be harmonization, or where we could make things more universal, and that there seems to be kind of 3 chapters or 3 buckets where you need to consider, which would be the clinical use and research use, which is kind of where we've grown up, but now also this aspect of commercial use as well. And why I think that some standardized language would be really helpful, and maybe something that CBA could work on. I'm always really appreciative when people say, we worked really hard on this consent to get all this language right, and they make it available for other people to read and kind of leverage that language, that we could have some kind of core language in those 3 categories, and you could select it and use it as you needed. There are some fundamental differences in the way that a public bank would need to consent, everything kind of all up front, where in a family banking model it's a little bit different. We consent for banking and clinical use. And if that unit's going to go anywhere else or to be anything else, then it's the family's decision, and they will then sign the appropriate consent for that indication at that time, so that we have the luxury, I guess, of having the contact with them, and the time that you can do at time point 1 and time point 2, as opposed to, oh my gosh, I've got to think about everything now that may happen 10 years from now. I do think that, like I said, having some sort of standardized language, or I love the idea of doing a video. We live in an era where people get their information from YouTube Shorts or from TikTok, and so to be able to consume something in that amount of time and in through a words and visual, I think is really healthy. And because I think that if you put a 12-page document in front of somebody, even if they read it front to back, I don't know how we assure that the comprehension is there. So I think that some tools, I guess, is what it would be. So can we, develop those through CBA or otherwise?
Yeah, that's great. All right, so thanks for the collaboration on that section of the panel. I'd like to open it up now. As I mentioned, we're going to have 3 different really modules for this conversation. And so we focused this first piece on the current challenges today. Much of the conversation was on inventory management and releases, but I'd love to hear from the audience if there's any questions on current challenges that we didn't address, and a question that you may have for the panel.
Come on.
I don't know if we don't have a microphone
There's
set
no-
up here in the middle, so you could just raise your hand and
We'll repeat the question back.
we'll repeat the question. Yeah. Right here.
We talked a lot about utility and consent. I'm interested in general awareness.
So the question was awareness and understanding, really. Again, I'll just keep referencing the lunch I just had, and the colleague I was speaking with talking about Washington, D.C., and how, again, this conversation's been out there for 20 years, but even on the Congress side, getting confused that we're talking about embryonic stem cells, which obviously it's not. So awareness is an issue, but I'd love to hear from the panel. So Marcy or Kate, who would like to take that question first?
So I think there's still an education gap, right? We hear from donors, probably our most asked question, right, is always, are you going to clone my baby, right?
Absolutely same.
No matter how many things you message about it, and stem cells are a complicated issue, right? What to do with your cord blood is not an easy decision. So it's a challenging discussion to have. I think that all the banks, public, private, all of them do a lot of work to talk to families when they're thinking about what to do with their cord blood. And we start the conversation at least with, you can pay to have it banked for yourself, you could donate it to a public bank, and most of the time they end up getting thrown away. So I think you have to start with that. I think it's challenging to have big overarching messaging, because what ends up for us, there'll be a great story that comes out. I think Juliet Barker was on Good Morning America not too long ago with Robin Roberts about her transplant, right? And they talked about cord blood. So what happened was we got 50 calls that day about people wanting, I'm pregnant, I'm delivering next week, I'm in Iowa, I want to donate my cord blood, which also is really challenging for us, especially in the regulatory environment that we live in, right? Kate might be able, and Tomas might be able to get it to, get a kit to someone who wants to pay to donate, right? But even that is challenging, right? To know where they are, do you have a representative there? So those kind of big overarching educational things then become really individual challenges where we have to try to find a place for someone to put that effort, right? They want to donate their cord blood, I'm pregnant right now. And for our bank, right, they can only donate, we're only approved to donate in the 6 sites that we have. So it is a real challenge because people want to take action too. So we don't want to get people excited about donating their cord blood and then not have anything to do with that excitement. So I think it's a big challenge.
If I may add, I think that awareness has to be, we have to measure that awareness in 2 groups. One group is a constant one, and they are healthcare professionals, so midwives and OBGYNs. And it's super important to invest into that group because they will stay. And on the other hand, we have the group which is constantly changing, and you don't have that many chances to educate them. And even if you educate them, what is the average number of children per woman? As it's going down like that. So that's why I strongly believe that education is super important, and the more important is education of the healthcare professionals. Also, just to avoid such a situation that some of them still think, cord blood, okay, yeah, this is for the future, yes. No, actually, this year we are celebrating 35th anniversary of the first transplantation. Matthew is somewhere there, yes. So. And, for some healthcare professionals, it's still, looking for the future. Yes.
And look, when we talk about education, the one thing we still haven't achieved is ACOG and the American Pediatric Association. We're way too far down this road to have not made some change. We have facts, we have safety data, we've invested our lives in this industry, yet we haven't been able to get those associations to change their stance or add education to the OBs, which are constant. You always have new pregnancies, and so you're always having to try to educate the parent. But the doctors and the doctors we work with, we educate them, so they're educating their patients. So if you continue to do that, that's what will help fill this field. We've got to figure out a way to change that narrative and to get those associations to be allies of ours. And the squeaky wheel gets oiled, and we're not squeaking. So.
Anyone else want to add to that topic?
No,
Or-
I think you
okay,
guys
we're
said
good.
everything I was going to say.
I think the other thing I would say is too, it's a tough conversation to have with families, right, Tomas? When someone says, well, what should I do with my cord blood? And I've had some nurses have really visceral reactions, like, oh, they shouldn't private bank, right? They shouldn't private bank. They shouldn't have to pay for it. But I say, well, if you're going to have that conversation with someone, you better be able to. I plan to live to be 100. I'm halfway there, right? So these babies born today are going to live to be 100. So if you're going to tell someone not to private bank when it's something that they may be able to afford, people spend that much on purses, right? So if you're going to tell somebody that they shouldn't do that, you better be able to know that there's not going to be technology that's going to happen in the next 100 years that you would be able to use your own genetic material, right? Something's going to happen in my lifetime yet, right? That I'm going to think, oh, I wish I might have had my cord blood somewhere. So I think that conversation takes a lot of education of a lot of people, right? Including physicians and midwives, including the people giving the consent form, right? Including public banks and private banks, because that's a one-time biological event. So it's really important that whoever's doing something with it, maybe they just want to throw it away. That's their choice, right? It's not for us to judge about what they decide to do with it, but we want them to really be armed with the right information, because we don't really know what's going to happen in the next 100 years. I would hope something, right?
I would hope so too. And I agree. I think really the other piece of this is there's just so much information. There's not a lack of information out there. It's consistent information. And it's not always awareness, is it common awareness, but then actually understanding, because a lot of people have heard of this, but actually understanding what it can do, it's a wide range in terms of what's out there. And I think might be another opportunity really for the CBA to collectively have a common set of language on what this is and what it can do, because, a little bit of marketing 101 would be saying the same thing the same way, it'll start to resonate. And I think that's been a little bit of the challenge that I've seen as well. Before we move on to the next topic, any other questions from the audience relating to just current challenges today? Yes. The future of private banking? It's a good segue. It's actually coming up in the next section. So if you could hold on to that question, I'll make sure we answer it for you. But if not, raise your hand again and I'll make sure we talk about it. Thank you. All right, we'll move on to the second topic here. I'll keep us on schedule. So before we talk about the future, we're going to talk about just today. So the second section is around ways we can actually change today. The first topic is around propelling regenerative medicine, and love to have Anna and Kate speak to this one. So regenerative medicine uses today of cord blood stem cells continues to be the wave of new releases versus traditional uses for transplant medicine. How can the industry help drive more use and more releases in this space?
So can I go first? So definitely is the new wave, but the wave for this wave has crested, and I feel like is coming out to a new baseline. I think that if we follow that historical pathway and use it kind of as a model for maybe future, is that the family cord blood banking inventory is a really nice place to start. We, using an auto or a sibling or a relative in a novel technology may have a slightly easier regulatory pathway, and there is a inventory of hundreds of thousands of families who are invested and actively interested in being made aware of novel uses and potentially being participants in these types of studies. So I think that's one way. I can't read myself. And then I think I was going to go to you now.
Okay. So for public banking, I agree. It's good news, very good news, that all these new indications are in the horizon, and there are certainly, we're almost distributing as many units for traditional uses as for these new potential indications. So, from where we sit, we certainly see the interest. Now, the caveat here is that all these companies that are very early stage of development, so they are, wanting units, but they are still optimizing their processing, or they are in, starting early phase clinical trials. So we see a huge potential in the future, but right this minute they are sort of requesting like research units that they can use for their optimizing their processes so that they can start manufacturing. So overall, very good news, I would say, for the public banking field. Again, another caveat here is that it's distribution for new use for these new indications. It's very different from the distribution for the traditional indications in terms of the burden on the bank. So when we are distributing a unit for transplant, basically we just receive the order from the NMDP, and there's some paperwork that we need to do on our end, but we handle that within a day or two, some additional testing, and then we ship out the unit. So overall, it's a very limited set of activities that we need to do on our end. For these new indications, that's not the case. So there is a significant administrative burden on the banks. In our experience, from first contact to actually distribution of any units for this purpose, it takes anywhere between 9 to 12 months. So it's a very long runway. And every company has their own set of they're also going through this process for the first time. So it's like a learning curve on both our end and their end. And they don't really know what the regulatory requirements are, and they're getting feedback from European regulatory agencies and FDA or lawyers. So we are not standardized in any way at this point in terms of the requests that are coming our way. So to answer the question of what can banks do to facilitate this, we are certainly taking steps to at least try to standardize the process on our end, because otherwise it becomes too onerous. So we're sort of trying to come up with a standard C of A that we can provide to any company that is requesting these units. We are also seriously contemplating contracting with an external organization to do a self-audit, so that then we can present that report instead of having to host an audit for every single company that is coming to visit us. We're also seriously entertaining coming up with a standardized supplier questionnaire, so that we don't have to be responding to their specific questionnaires every time. So we're doing everything we can to sort of force some standardization on our end. But it requires a lot of time and effort, and again, it's a long runway. We as an industry, there are many banks that are actually thinking that there has to be a better way to do this, and NMDP, step up and created this NMDP biotherapies that could become like a single point of entry for all these companies that are interested, so that, again, we are not reinventing the wheel every time there is an engagement like this. But it's in its infancy. It has a lot of potential. We are seeing a lot of interest, not just from the US, but a lot international. These companies are told that they need US source units, so there is a lot of interest. We're just, the market is starting, and it's clunky right this minute, but I think it will get better.
I thought of one more thing that I think that can be done. I know from our point of view, from the family banking point of view, is we've gone to storing in a 5-compartment bag, and thinking forward to regenerative medicine uses, understanding that unknown number of cells to start, so you could use the whole thing or you can use part of it, and that allows flexibility for whatever the starting material is, but also it had been our experience sometimes that when a clinical trial exists and a family has an opportunity to participate in it, if their child has that indication, that sometimes they would hesitate because they didn't want to consume the whole unit, right? This is that child's only unit, and they're like, well, this is experimental, it's never been done before, why don't I wait and let it get proven out a little bit and then we'll use it. But the potential of having it in that format may, encourage some families to say, well, I know if I can use part of it to participate in this, and I might still have some more left in the future, that there might be things that we can do technically or operationally that support it as well.
Yeah, that's great. And maybe just off the cuff here, Tomas, as well, just from an international perspective, anything different that you're seeing as it relates to really releases on regenerative medicine, or anything that you're thinking about doing differently?
I think that first of all, we have two types of tissues, and they have to be handled differently, so cord blood and cord tissue. And so with cord blood and the regenerative uses of that, I mean, at least the ones which are taking place right now are pretty obvious. Yes, it's just you don't manipulate that, you just inject it. However, with cord tissue, it's a bigger problem, because at least what I see in Europe, the banks do not have the standardized protocols for preserving the cord tissue in a way which will be good, or which will be appropriate for any manufacturing site to do that, because they just, sometimes, yes, do not want to exaggerate, but in the worst case scenario is just have a piece of cord and put it into freezer. That's it, yes, and that's not enough. You don't have the donor screening. You don't have any test at the beginning. So I'm afraid that no one can accept such a cord tissue as a starting material. On the other hand, you can do it correctly if you have instructions from the manufacturing site which we are working with. So you can do it bad, or you can do it correctly as well.
That's good, and I think maybe fodder for next year as well to talk about, as we're cord blood association. Maybe we need to think about cord blood and tissue association, so we can address that topic next year for sure. I think it's a whole topic into itself. Thank you, Tomas. In terms of the next topic I'll talk about and this is something that Calvin, you hit on a little bit, partnership to change the industry. We talk about whether it's the ACOG opinion or working with new residents. Really, industry has historically not worked in unison to drive change, and that can be between public and private banks. I like to think that has already changed. But as it relates to societies, it hasn't really propelled further adoption. So how can the CBA as a collective group work on making that change? And would call on Marcy or Kate to both jump in on this one.
So I guess my initial thought would be to a conversation that I had recently with someone from ASTCT. They said, are you going this year? And I was like, no, we don't talk about cord blood. I would love to figure out a way to kind of, become the shiny thing again. As they said, I don't know exactly what the lever is to pull on that, but how do we get in front of the people outside of this room, right? The people who are already pro cord blood. So that may be one venue. I would also like to talk about collaborating with, partnering in a scenario like HLA Today as a program run by the NMDP, where I think that the banks or even the transplant facilities, we could all work together as a program by which they try to speed the conversations and the thoughts about appropriate cases moving to transplant by HLA typing the recipient and potential donors within the family. So I think that's a good way that we could partner. And then the other thing I think you mentioned already was fellowships. Do you know what I mean? The fellowships exist in all different types of transplant facilities. How do we get cord blood friendly facilities or insert cord blood friendly practices in the fellowships earlier on in the training of clinicians? I don't know, we're an educational and technical committee, so maybe I should strictly talk about education and technical stuff, but those are just kind of some things that popped up in my mind.
I think there's also a missed opportunity in the OBGYN field too, and midwives, right? That it took us a long time to even get the ability to talk to their new residents when they come in every year in July, right? To talk about cord blood banking, and because the residents are going to end up doing a lot of the collections there. And I think, Tomas, your point is that that group of physicians and midwives are going to talk to their patients all the time, right? They're not going to be rotating as much. So I think there might be an opportunity for CBA to also interact with some of those medical schools and fellowships that are on the OBGYN side too, where they could talk about the benefits of cord blood, because those providers are going to have that initial conversation with people when they're getting ready to have a baby, right? So the best case scenario is that provider is going to have that really good conversation, and then the family is going to have the information that matters to them for them to make the decision about what to do with their cord blood, right? And we certainly don't want them thinking about it the day that they're having a baby. To, you know, Jeremy's point this morning when all the men in the room thought it was a great idea to consent women in labor. No one really wanted to talk to me when I was in labor, I'm sure. So I think that we need to back that up as much as we can to, you know, when people first begin thinking about having babies, and then to have their clinicians really have good conversations with them.
That's great. And maybe just asking one more follow-up question, you know, from a tactical perspective, I think that's the what we want to solve from a tactical perspective. Any thoughts specifically on what the CBA can do? Is the CBA, you know, is it creating a joint statement and a pamphlet that's delivered? Is it an educational CME? Any thoughts on what the CBA can collectively do, take on as a project, and what they might be able to execute?
I think a CME is a great idea. I love the collection video tutorial that was done, you know, statements about general, like delayed clamping, like, you know, these big issues, having, again, those kind of plug and play things that can be used that are not associated with any specific bank or public or private. They're coming from CBA. I think those are all good tools.
And to use our membership, right? We have experts on all sides of the fences here, right? So if we could collectively come together to get some educational pieces for families as they're making those kind of decisions, and for physicians to have really good conversations.
Great. All right, we'll hit the last topic in this section, which is we all know that the clinical work will help propel a lot of this education. And so if the clinical elements and results move faster, probably can shape the industry in a different way. So the question is, you know, the speed of clinical results never moves as quickly as a consumer, a healthcare professional, or patients and researchers would like. So how do we fuel the speed? This could be via INDs or other elements, and really, probably I'll use as one blocker, we can't just say dollars, because that might be something that we don't have available. So if we're not talking about just investment, what other elements can we do? And, you know, propose the question of how do we impact really the next 10 years? For some of us probably sat in this meeting 10 years ago and we said what the next 10 years would look like. Sitting here today, do we feel like it has met that objective of what we thought it was 10 years ago? And really then thinking, in the next 10 years, what do we want the next 10 years to look like, and what should it look like? So I'll ask that question to Anna and Marcy, but others can jump in as well.
I'll start. So I guess the good news is, right, Gamida has an approved product that's derived from cord blood, right? We can't not be here and not talk about that. So that's a big accomplishment, right? That's the only product except for the products of cord blood banks that have been approved. So how do we make it better? I feel like I would tell a developer, I probably have a biased opinion, but you should start with cord blood. That's going to shorten your time, period. If you're making a cell therapy, it's a product that's ready to go. It's been tested. It meets all of the requirements for SQIB. It's ready to go. We have an excess supply of it. So that would be my first thing, right? I think there's some barriers to that, but I feel like the banks also have to get in that mindset that we want to help developers. We've kind of taken an approach that we want to grow with them, right? So maybe we're providing research use only fresh units to begin with, and then as they progress, we're going to provide frozen units that look and feel a lot like what a clinical grade unit does, and then we can provide non-clinical frozen units, and then we can provide you clinical units, and then hopefully we'll provide you with units for your approved product at the end of the day. Mm-hmm. So I feel like we also need to be thoughtful that we can't just go right here to the big clinical grade units, which is what we were kind of born on, right? We need to rethink, and how do we get people into that funnel that's using cord blood? I tell my folks when our distributions, when we have one clinical distribution for the month, I always say, that's not ideal, right? And it's difficult to pay the bills with that. However, when I really get nervous is when we have no new research partners, because that means that there's nothing new coming. And we really need to think about the best ways to be efficient to get those units to people. And I think a lot of people just don't even understand that they're there. You know, we think about utilizing all the cord blood units that we collect. No one donates their cord blood to us for us to throw it in the garbage or for it to sit in the freezer for 10 years. So we want to think about how to move them into something useful.
Anna?
So to answer your question about whether, if we look back 10 years ago, do we think that we are where we wanted to be? Well, probably not. I think we all wish we had moved more quickly. I think these new indications or these new potential uses of cord blood, where cord blood is used as the starting material, will actually develop much more quickly. Because for those indications, there is an monetary alignment, like incentive alignment, in that there is a company who's investing in the development who will eventually own the product. So that's traditional development, and it should go much faster than cord blood, direct use of cord blood, because the problem that we've had with direct use of cord blood or expanding indications of cord blood right away as a product is that, the entities who own the product, which are the banks, don't have the resources to sort of invest in the development. So there is a misalignment there, and that's why we haven't progressed as quickly as we all wish we had. We at Duke in the last 9 years, we've actually have been lucky to have, philanthropic funding that allowed us to complete upwards of 13 clinical trials. But again, this is relying on philanthropy, which is not your traditional way of advancing therapies. Because the other alternative would have been NIH funding, but NIH funding is not sufficient to really complete phase 2 studies. So again, for these new indications where cord blood is the starting material, I think we will get much more quickly to potential products. For cord blood, we are close to getting new indications and new products in CP and other indications, but it's going to require new models or figuring out how, we can find an investor that actually will have some sort of a return on the product or something. I think you need to align monetary incentives, otherwise it will not progress.
Do you think there's anything the CBA can do to create aligned focus on maybe fewer indications, less expansive, and if it's more focused, that may help pull things to move them faster?
Yes, and maybe also sort of having more conversations with the FDA, because the other alternative would be to actually use data generated through expanded access to see if that would be, a way to sort of maybe not substitute a traditional clinical trial, but sort of complement the data that you are generating through your clinical trial so that your clinical trial doesn't have to be as big and as expensive. So, we certainly need to be creative if we really want to get to the finish line.
Makes sense. Anyone else want to jump in on?
I have a quick,
please.
a quick comment, because, you wouldn't necessarily think that family banking is in a spot to, move today's clinical, but we do have a unique position sometimes where we become aware that a cord blood unit, that the donor has developed some sort of condition, like sickle cell anemia, where we've been able to, kind of get consent for those affected units to be released to be worked for gene therapy, research and studies. And there's also a study going on right now called the RECORD study, which is if the donor develops leukemia at some point in their life and the family is willing to release that unit to the RECORD study, they're doing some really exciting clinical work there. So it's not on a huge scale, but we do have a unique position where with the ongoing relationship with the families, we can find out if we have certain units in our inventory that are affected and therefore very interesting for clinical research, at least, to push that forward.
Another thing, Peter, with the inventories on the public bank, and I know some of the CDMOs that have been out there looking for fresh units to build, CD34s, whatever they're trying to build, and they've gone into the frozen inventory and tried to sell. I know different banks have tried to sell. The recovery's not as good, but there still is recovery. And that price of what you want to sell a frozen unit for that you've got a big investment in to industry that will use it for these recovery other items, that's got to come in check because those CDMOs don't want to pay too much for that unit, and the bank doesn't want to sell that unit because it might get used one day at a certain price. So some way to free up some of that inventory, if you can identify which are the units that you know aren't going to sell, and lower the price to those different industry players that want to have that recovery, that we already have an inventory that'll free up space for new inventory.
Yep, makes sense. And I would just add on to Kate's point a little bit on data. I think that's an interesting element for some of the private and public banks, and maybe something the CBA can do is, if we're trying to propel, is how do we use the data? Because between all the banked units that exist collectively, it's a pretty unbelievable repository of information, health information, patient information, but there really hasn't been any cross-sharing. And if we think through how to take that data, do some cross-sharing to help propel, certain research, could be something interesting. And it's something where the walls have probably been up a little higher across industry, but that could be something that is looked at.
Sure.
Yep. Okay, I promise we'll move on to the core topic of the future, translation. But before I do so, as it relates to just current banking today in the last 3 questions, are there any members of the audience who would like to ask the panel a question?
And there's a microphone set up now.
Yeah.
We got a mic right in the middle there. And we'll put Tomas and Anna on point for this section.
So you just started to talk about something that I've been wondering about. So I run a public cord blood bank, and we have been getting loads of requests for cord blood as starting material from our bank inventory and of smaller units and so on. And looking at long-term sustainability of the public cord blood banking program, we've really been looking at our cost recovery models and how we might get more cost recovery. We're not allowed to sell units in Australia. You can't sell human tissue, but we can certainly get cost recovery. And I remember a few years ago at this conference, we did have a whole session where we sort of compared cost recovery, but the field's really changed since then. We're providing cord blood for all sorts of new types of platform technologies. And so maybe that's something that CBA could think about helping. I mean, I know people don't really want to share what they're charging for, private enterprise or public or research, but some sort of guidance around how we even look at this, I suppose, from a business model would be really helpful. So I don't know if anyone's got any comments on that.
We've been grappling with this, especially the banks that are working through the NMDP biotherapies, because on the one hand, you feel like you should be able to share some of this information. On the other hand, we very quickly get in trouble with the lawyers, and so we don't know really how to navigate this. So all I can say is that it is an issue. We don't really. I'm looking at Christina because we haven't found a solution in that we've been told that we really cannot be sharing information or standardizing pricing because that would be considered collusion and not legal. So we can't really go there. At least that's the.
Yeah, I think, quite a few years ago, it was probably 5 years ago, the public cord blood banks and WMDA cord blood working group were here, and we all sort of freely shared what we would provide a frozen unit or a fresh unit for. But, like I said, the field's really changed since then. So I know there's no easy answer, but something around guidance as to how you even tackle that from a business development side of things would be really helpful.
Yeah, minimally what we've been trying, Christina, I keep pointing at you, but what we've been trying to do is to sort of at least standardize the type of products that we're offering, because we've also found that it's a huge learning curve for the companies that are coming to us for these products. They don't really understand the difference between research only or IND unit or license unit, or the fact that they can actually get just a segment if that's all they need. So we have been working on developing educational materials and standardizing sort of the language so that everybody's referring to the same products the same way.
That's a good start.
I think also it's tough even for the association to talk about pricing, right? We can't do that either. But
Yeah.
maybe what we can think about is ways, I know in our bank, we really never considered storage, which is, those of you in the HRSA stuff with me know that I've been talking to them about the fact that we never really thought about how much it costs to store a unit over, when we did our costs for HRSA, we did the hard costs to get it frozen, but we didn't think about storage. So I think there might be some room for us to think about, I shouldn't say this, but we didn't even really know very well what it cost us to do an individual unit. So I think that's the first step, is making sure that we have the finance people on board to actually get you a good number about what it actually costs. And to think about all the things, including the education, including getting the unit there and then getting it into the freezer and then all of the testing and then all of the time to get it listed and then storing it for however many years your average is. So I think we might be able to have some input on how to do that and then think about how, then you can do a better job of coming up with your own price.
If I may comment, because you mentioned standardized product. I think that especially for the startup companies, they don't have like a standardized product. That's, they are asking for so narrow and specific requirements, which we don't even measure in our standard units. So like genetic mutations, for example, yes. And then, okay, we can count the probability of having a unit of a given number of TNC, volume, whatever. But then there is that factor of uncertainty. And on top of that, I want that those units will have that genetic mutations or will not have that genetic mutations. And then how to calculate that, it's a really like a complicated. But finance people can do it. That's definitely, I agree that.
Heather Brown, Cord Blood Registry. This is a little bit of a stream of consciousness because only formulating this thought as I hear you all talking about what we can do now to get ready the future and keep saying in your comments, cord blood this, cord blood that, cord blood this, or when Dr. Kurtzberg says, hey, welcome to the Cord Blood Association meeting. But when I say that, I really mean all associated perinatal tissues. And all of us here know what the parentheses is, but the world at large doesn't know that. Should we just get over cord blood? Because, people maybe have perceptions that 20 years ago cord blood had a lot of promise, but it hasn't lived up to it. So we need to evolve. If people still think cord blood's, not good, maybe like Dr. Fingrit's presentation yesterday and the barriers of why people donate, maybe people don't listen to donation after they hear the word blood because they hate peripheral blood draw and they can't hear anymore about blood being taken because they think it's going to be a painful, awful process. Like maybe we need, as an industry, to move away from focusing on cord blood because we are talking about cord tissue and all kinds of, perinatal tissues, and that's a mouthful for the general public. Is it newborn stem cells? Probably not. Stem cells probably limits what we're doing as well. Is it just simply more attached to the placenta? The placenta contains the cord, it contains blood within it. We as an industry are out there and probably increasingly so going to be competing with birth tissue procurement organizations, and that's what they're talking about. So anyway, that's my comment for the panel. Should we, or anyone in the audience, is it time to move away from cord blood?
I think we need a new brand.
Would anyone like to jump in on that one? I have a thought, but given Heather is my colleague, I'll let
I
some
don't
of the
think we
panel
can
go
throw the
first.
baby out with the bathwater. I hear what you're saying, Heather, and I agree a lot that these other tissues and everything outside of this room, we all know it's cord blood. But the best collectors of birthing tissues is in this room. In this industry. And the guys that are using those other tissues don't know that. And that's what we need to spearhead to bring, because we got billion-dollar industries on the sideline that are using the same raw product we are, with 200 and 300 and 400 salespeople out there in the sports medicine market and the wound care market. And we're just standing idly by, and we've got to figure out how to save our industry by capturing some of that, and they would welcome it. And they've never done CGMP collections, and they don't want to do collections. At the same time, it's got hurdles because a lot of those products are C-sections only, and so that closes down our marketplace on the donor side. So I hear what you're saying, but we do have a BLA license in the industry now, and that means a lot, and so I don't think we can run away from it. It's just how do we sandwich it in there in that messaging with everything else is I think, vitally important.
Thanks.
I'll just jump in, and I agree with you, but I also agree with Heather's point that being more open-minded to other areas does provide access to more industry interest and speaks to truly what we're all doing as well. So threading that needle of maybe accomplishing what the tried and true is in the BLAs while also expanding, that's what we need to solve for. So great. Yes, we'll do two more in this section, then we'll move on to the future. We've got about a half an hour.
Well, then I won't do all of my questions, but
Yep.
One thing I'd like to put Marcy on the hot seat for a second, because we have the Advisory Council, Blood and Stem Cell Transplant, which is a direct line to the federal government. And so I think we need to know more about who sits on that council and make sure that we communicate with them about what the needs are of the cord blood industry, the perinatal industry, whatever we want to call it, so that we can communicate, because it exists, and they're reviving it to be more interactive. So I think that's one thing we need to do. About education, I think there's not only ACOG, but there's also the accreditation for a Council for Graduate Medical Education, which they don't have a cancer subsection, but they do have an OB residency and internship program that we need to be able to get maybe just one class in their curriculum about cord blood, or about sources that are very available. Anna, I liked how you talked about the NCBI perhaps giving us goals to make sure that what it is. I think the cord blood banks could maybe get together and leverage their strengths to collect what it is they're best at, but I think that requires a lot of trust. So that might be kind of tough. Calvin, we've talked about for 25 years now the collection tool to maximize what it is we're getting out of the placenta. That's a future topic, so maybe you'll cover that later. I don't know. But I would like to put a plug in too for the NMDP Alliance, Cord Blood Bank Alliance, because I think that's going to be a standard for a single point of access for all of these future therapies. Thanks.
Great, thank you.
So I want to just be a realist here for a second. I really think what's going to save cord blood is to develop additional indications, clinical indications beyond transplant that it can be used for. We're working on cerebral palsy and HIE and stroke, but and autism, and there's promising early data. But to get through the regulatory pathway, to do the right kind of trials, to get those kind of approvals, costs a lot of money. And it costs tens of millions of dollars. And if there was an easier way to do it, I would be the first person to sign up. But somehow, I really don't think cord blood is going to flourish until, and I don't mean all these other products, because I think that's a separate arm, but I mean cord blood itself that's already banked, whether it's private or public, that's available for use, needs other indications. Colleen worked on ways to increase graft tolerance, or ways to increase GVL in leukemia, or whatever it is. We do little studies and we see some interesting data, and then we don't have the resources to take it all the way down the path to commercialization. I think if we had some great philanthropist who really believed in cord blood and could throw $300 to $500 million into this, we could do it. I know that's a crazy amount of money, but I honestly think you kind of need that kind of money to get there. And then I think this would all flourish. We'd still have a second problem, though, because FDA is very conservative, for lack of a better word, about what the starting material is and how it's been handled. And we did studies with autologous cord blood and cerebral palsy and had good results, but when we talked to them about would they allow us to just qualify the material, post-freezing with just testing on thawing or potency or whatever you want to call it, they said no. They said, their vision was there'd be one bank in the entire world. They all follow the same SOPs. There'd be one controller of this bank, and the product would be uniform. And the fact that there are 6 million or 7 million, whatever the number is, of privately banked units that, to Kate's point, parents have invested in and probably are fine as long as they meet certain release specifications, just is something that the FDA is not going to easily buy into, and I'm sure the other regulators in other countries are similar. So I do think we as an organization can work on strategies to show equivalency between privately and publicly banked units, or to develop the specifications that say this is a good unit that can be used for therapy XYZ. I do think we can work on that for less than $500 million. But I also think the reality is we have to figure out how to fund some of these clinical trials in a way that's going to be compliant with the regulators, get them what they want to give us approvals. And we've struggled with that for 10 years, or more than 10 years. So that's still a big challenge. I know you said money wasn't on the table, but I have to say it.
No, it's totally fair. I was trying to hopefully see if we had some other creative ideas around it, but it may be the sheer fact that that is the answer. And then it may be how do we creatively find the pathways for the funding is actually where we might need to collaborate. Yeah. So we'll take that as maybe an action for the group and to talk at the next CBA meeting. If I could ask you to hold the question to the very next section, because we're about to run out of time and I want to make sure we cover.
But it's related with this comment.
Okay, go ahead real quick.
It's really quick. I'm a family bank from Argentina. We live in Argentina, the economic problems that we have. We have 40,000 samples stored in our bank, and when I heard $10 million from Kutzberg, and I think about the whole family bank industry in the world, I said, it's nothing, If for us that we are a family bank in Argentina, and this will define the future of Family Corporate Bank, and they say $10 million, and we send 5 patients of us to Duke University and have the result that we have, and we have all the abstract with CP and autism. I don't know what are we waiting as an industry to invest in this that will lead the future of Family Corporate Bank. The other thing is nothing. I don't know. I came here from Argentina and I didn't hear at all about CP and autism, and we are very concerned about that. We need information about that, and we need to invest as a whole industry in this, because it will define the next 10 years of our industry. That's all.
Great, thank you. And I think it's a good point is, again, I think what we covered today, there's so many different areas that we can focus on. And I think as we're going for the next 10 years, probably is around concentration and picking 1 or 2 things versus 10 things, because otherwise they'll all move at a snail's pace. So valid point, and thank you for offering your experience as well from the Argentinian perspective. So let's move on to our last set of questions here on new models for growth. This is more around future thinking and changes of what's ahead of us, and maybe a little bit of creativity as well. So the model for both public and private banks in most cases has been relatively static for the last 10 years. From an industry perspective, what are some of the new ways we could disrupt the actual current models, and how might factions of the industry collaborate in new ways that haven't been done today? And so for this area, I'd like to ask Calvin and Marcy to jump in.
Well, like we said, I think we're going down that pathway. To Dr. Kurtzberg's comments a second ago, cord blood really is a longevity product. And we don't say it enough, but it extends life, and that is a big area for investors. You see it across the field. There's a lot of big money that's going into longevity products. So we could figure out those different messaging standpoint, because it is in the message when you're in front of those guys. If they see a future to it, they're the ones that'll help us put the money in to get the funding where we can have the clinicians do the trials and do the things. So, every once in a while you just got to clean off the whiteboard and start again, and try to go down that panel a different way, but still try to get to the end of the road to give good product to the industry, save lives, and continue to evolve in ways to bring down the cost of putting the units in and getting the transplants done.
Anything you do to specifically disrupt the industry?
Start over? No, I would build a bigger inventory and force the transplant centers to have to choose them. And, really big units, don't bank anything that's under $2 billion. And put really big units on the registry, and maybe that will help sway them back.
Marcy?
I think I would think about it, the inventory piece and the industry in general, right? I feel like we have a nice baseline of an inventory, right? And we know transplant physicians are taking out those big units, high 34, high TNC, and maybe we need to think about just replacing those and then focusing our energy on what applications would be best for the rest of them, right? Because our bank is in a kind of a replacement strategy, right? Our goal is to really replace those units on the top tier that are the ones that are ready for transplant and that we know turn over really fast. They're not in our, if it's 2.5 or greater, it's in our inventory for a year or less. They're gonna go right back out. They're really hard to come by, but what I think we need to think about is overarchingly inventory turnover, right? You can't have the same units sitting there. So what things can we engage in? And Calvin, you started to touch on it. This group has focused mostly on transplant, which if you think about the big picture, are there 6,000 transplants a year? Which is even if we took all of those transplants from adult donors and they were all cord blood, still a really small market in the big picture. So maybe we should think about things that are a bigger market that we can have a bigger impact on more people. We've stayed away from knees, but we've stayed away from other things like that, orthopedics, because there's been some bad actors in that space. Well, maybe we can find some good actors that are going to go through the regulatory path like you're supposed to and use the units that aren't going to be used for transplant for those kind of applications. And the whole point of disruptive technology, we've been doing incremental steps for a long time, and you have to do that to get to your place in the industry. But then if you keep doing that, it's just going to get harder and harder to take smaller steps. And the whole point of disruptive is to take some big jump that it may be a little bit higher risk, but you really do need to clean off the whiteboard and start from a new place.
Excellent. Thank you all. Next question is around alternative sources and impact. So really, there's been alternative models of business, and Calvin, I know you're at the forefront of this, and using other cells derived from cord blood or tissue. So there may be even a broader demand more acutely for those services and products. So this can include birth tissues, amnion. How can these alternative sources be complementary to the focus of the CBA? And it's kind of a little bit around what Heather recommended, but how can we still remain focused and really that core focus of companies and institutions? So I would ask Calvin and Anna to jump in on this.
Well, back to education, from the physicians to the hospitals to the parents is a very important piece. The industries that are now coming behind us to come after these tissues as well, and you're finding that in competitions, there's companies that are coming in and getting contracts in hospitals to be donor collection. They ain't collecting cord blood, they're only collecting cord tissue, or they're only collecting placentas. And a way to come together and make those companies realize that we're really good at what we do and to help subsidize our collections. Whether units can be split, where you took a cord blood unit, but you were still be able, through the consent and health histories, to provide the placenta. I mean, just think about how many more collections you could do and how much more staff you could hire in these big birthing hospitals. You don't have to go to all the small hospitals that don't have any birth. It's a numbers game. So you've got to be at the birthing centers that have a lot of OBGYNs. They have good prenatal care. That's an important piece of getting big units, good health care, and a doctor base that wants to educate their patients that sees the value in what we're doing. That's, I think, the biggest thing we can do right now with this next level of industry that's coming in. Like I said, the placental market right now is huge. There is a huge demand, and it's undermet. There's more orders for placentas now in wound care than are actually being provided. So there's opportunities, and I would encourage banks to look for either partners or different sources of being able to distribute those products, because the Lonzas of the world and stuff, they're growing, they're doing this work, and they're not going to stop. They've built these facilities, and they're going to continue to build product for these other industries.
Anna?
I agree, and the beauty of all of this is that it's actually very complementary with our main mission anyway. So these are opportunities that are, completely aligned with our main mission, and it's not disrupting what we're trying to do in terms of collecting cord blood. So it's like a win-win situation.
Okay, makes sense. Anyone else on this topic? All right. Okay, we'll move on to the next one. So last question really is around new models for growth, and this is around more blue sky. So back to budgets again, but budgets, compliance, and regulatory slightly aside, what new models could be for the future, and really how can the CBA support it? Ultimately, we know the goal is around continuous sustainability of the category. So I'll ask Kate and Tomas to jump in, but anyone else can as well.
Sure. So from a family banking point of view, I think that our pivot to the future is how to lean into getting more value out of what we are already getting, or procedures that we already have in place, right? So families are sending us their cord blood and cord tissue. Moms are sending us maternal blood. Besides processing and freezing those for transplant, what else could we do with those samples, right? What other information can we harvest from those samples? What other value can we provide back to the families, to our primary, but also, maybe other partners or collaborators? And so one way we've done that is through leveraging genomics. So we have a genomics division in our company as well. And so that's a service offering that we can provide to families with genetic counseling on the front end and the back end of that as well. If I don't want to get into this too much because it's a huge area, but there's some really cool publications that have come out just in the past couple months. There was one from the BabySeq project out of Harvard that just published in July in the Journal of Human Genetics, looking at sequencing almost as a newborn screen, and trying to figure out what the rate of finding actionable pediatric onset conditions were, and then also taking a very critical look at what the actionability of those findings were. So this is kind of where it's still, I think, sticky. Yep. But it is an angle that is being published on. There's 2 other publications. There was one in JAMA. Everybody in all of your bags, when we signed up for this conference, there's there's a pad and a QR code. It leads right to one of the publications that I'm talking about as well. So it's an area of interest that is up and coming. And like I said, it's we're already in these products. And is there additional testing you can do on maternal blood that would provide any sort of value or insight? Taking the products and then also taking the systems you already have in place, right? We freeze things really well. Are there other things that we could freeze and hold in long-term storage? There's all the resources that you have in place, and just figuring out how to squeeze them to new potential partners to find more value.
Okay. And do you find that, just a follow-up question, that patients are looking to you as a banker, private bank, for additional services as an entry point?
Yes, I mean, in a way, I think that it's in, if you already are talking to them about preserving cord blood for potential future use, they're thinking about the health of their family, they're thinking about, what they can do to be forward thinking about personalized medicine and knowing more about themselves to put them in the best position to have a healthy life for themselves and for their children. So yes, I feel like well, genomics is always a challenging, we need lots of videos and stuff to get into it, but I think that it is not a hard stretch. It's, yes, it's an easy place to talk about it.
Well, blue sky strategy, I think we are not at that point to think about to be super creative. We have to understand what we are doing and to understand the value chain of our service. We are not a big refrigerator. We are providing the cells for a therapy. And actually, our clients, most of the largest banks are 20, 25, 30 years old. Our inventory is getting older. The parents of our children are getting older. We have even the clients who were banked at 20, 25 years old, and now they are becoming clients. So they will have a different needs. So being stronger in terms of assisting them with the cell therapies when they need, doing better the partnership with the clinics who develop the therapies with scientists, clinicians, and so on. I think this is our job to do. And of course, as Kate mentioned, adding additional services to show that this is a more complex service. This is definitely a good strategy. On the declining market, overall, I mean, at least in Europe, the demography is going down like a crazy. So we can have offering more services to the same client, and by that being more sustainable as a business, which is not easy. I mean, we also observe a couple of banks in Europe just ceasing activity, and sometimes it was in a controlled way, sometimes unfortunately not. So that's also generates some problems of industry if that happens. So we have to think long term, to be sustainable, to be well prepared for providing our services for long term.
And there's also some new, banking services that are coming online. You're seeing like GoodCell, they're banking blood, they're banking plasma for normal adults. There's immune cell banking that's coming on with all the CAR T therapy that's happening. So, I think the different banks can maybe find different channels to also operate in partnership with some of these other things as they grow, because it's all marketing, obviously, and some of those companies that are coming on have some good business plans in place, and there may be opportunities for banks to get involved in that as well.
Mm-hmm. And probably ways for the CBA to collaborate as well, just given that it's all in the same general scope. So really good. For this section on the future, since we have about 5 minutes left, just wanted to open it back up to the audience for any questions for this last topic.
I think I wanted to ask about the two different aspects. One is the operational model, where the corporate banks, either is a private bank or a public bank. And the second is what John mentioned about expanding the potential of the products which we collect. So the operating model, I think, which we realized a few years back about the public bank sustainability, because we do have a huge amount of inventories, how to better utilize that. And in order to sustain the bank and to maintain the inventory, I think the banking model has switched. I think some corporate banks are available as a hybrid model where they do both private and public. But what we have introduced is a crossover banking where the parents can keep it for themselves for X number of years, maybe 5 years, then they can donate to the public inventory. So in this way, the cost of public banking operations goes down and our inventory goes up, and also it is a balanced view for the donors themselves. That is on an operational model where this will be sustaining for a longer period of time because we have done so far around 5 years now, and we have an inventory of over 2,000 those of crossover banking model. So this has helped the public bank like us to sustain the financial part where it can be on a ground, because we do have an overhead cost. All of our donor recruitment team, the lab operations has already been paid for. So this additional model will help us to generate revenue and as well as increase our inventory in future. So that is more on an operating model. But when it comes to the blood components, we started to explore cord blood platelet lysates to supply for cell therapy industries. So that is actually we are disposing it off in a cord blood banking industry Plasma is another byproduct. We started to prepare umbilical cord plasma, allogenic, for eye drops. We do have around 80 patients enrolled in the clinical program. So far, there's no adverse events, and especially for the chronic dry eye syndromes and post-eye surgery patients, we do provide umbilical cord platelet lysate as well as plasma. And the other component is red blood cells, especially the very preterm, like 32 weeks, preterm kids needs fetal protein, fetal hemoglobin. So procuring an adult RBC is much more complex in the case of the newborns, so that exploring RBCs from cord blood can also be a potential applications for these extremely newborn babies which needs transfusions. So if you think outside the box rather than transplant, because transplant will be there, because cord blood banking industries has been established, we can't go back and explore much on the transplant. But what are the other possible products and business models which cord blood banking industry people can explore so that we can sustain both, whether it's a private or a public? So at least for the next 5 to 10 years, we need to think of expanding it. The last is therapeutic biobanking. Cord blood banking can be as a next level to provide starting materials for cell and gene therapy products. We started this 2 years back, and I started to support almost $90 million projects. So the resources which we have, because as a public bank, we do dispose almost 80% of the units due to cell cutoff criteria. So these products have already been screened. The GTPs are already done. So these products can be a good starting material for those industries as well.
Well, I think this is what you are saying. Basically, this is the concept of cord blood banking 2.0, which was proposed by the group from Barcelona a couple of years ago, and that's true. I mean, hybrid banking the other cells, using the bank material for the other purposes. I think this is our future reality.
I think we have another panelist for next year to join us. Thank you very much. Any other questions from the audience? Okay, we're right at time. Well, I just want to thank the panel for a really good collaborative and detailed discussion. I think we hit on a number of different themes that we all have to think about and really start to harness and hone in on what are the couple things we want to focus on as a group. But thank you all. It's been a great audience, and I think we're on to the next section in a break. Thank you.